الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. Until now we have studied textual evidence, non-textual evidence and the different arguments presented in ilm al-usul in order to derive a shari'i ruling. Now we need to look at another angle of all of this religious evidence and see how we are able to prove the veracity or the authority of these particular arguments. When it does come to for example, shari'i evidence, how are we able to take from it confidence in knowing that the tradition is authentic and it can be used in an argument in order for the jurist to use it in the process of deducing a shari'i ruling. Ulama, scholars in ilm al-hadith and also in the other various religious related sciences have come up with different categories of hadith. When they are confronted with a particular narration, this narration needs to be analyzed and scrutinized in different ways. If the source of the hadith is frequently mentioned through numerous ways, and different chains, this hadith is called a mutawatir hadith. Hadith mutawatir, or widely transmitted hadith. Hadith mutawatir. A hadith mutawatir or a widely transmitted hadith could be taken as hadith mutawatir in its context, in the wordings itself, which is what we call a hadith mutawatir lafzi, which means that the exact words have been mentioned in an abundant way through different chains of many different narrators, or it could be mutawatir in its meaning, in its ma'na, which means that the wording could be different, but the context is exactly the same. The wording is different, but what it refers to, what it indicates is exactly the same. This is also called hadith mutawatir. Hadith mutawatir lafzi, hadith mutawatir bil-lafz, hadith mutawatir bil-ma'na or ma'nawi. Now, that is explained in this particular way. Anything that does not have that widely transmitted reference, or something that isn't abundantly, frequently mentioned, and doesn't have so many different chains about. Let me give an example of what a hadith mutawatir would be. For example, hadithul thaqalain, that is a widely transmitted hadith. Or hadith ghadir khum, that is another widely transmitted hadith. Anything that does not amount to being classified as a widely transmitted hadith is called khabarul wahid. Wahid in Arabic means one, but here it has nothing to do with the word one, with the number one. It means a solitary narration, which means that it has not reached the level of being classified as a mutawatir hadith. So they call it khabaru ahad or khabarul wahid. Now, when it comes to khabar mutawatir or hadith mutawatir, of course, it obviously makes the hadith higher in its value. As for khabarul wahid, as for a solitary narration, what happens with it? One needs to look that if it comes from an authentic chain, if the narrators that are narrating this particular hadith are reliable, are trustworthy, are honest, are genuine, then of course it can be taken into consideration and accepted as authentic. And this is all based on the ayah which is called Ayatul Naba, which is what we had mentioned before, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if a fasiq, if a person who is a corrupt, a profligate person brings you news, then you need to verify. That would be the mantuq, or the meaning, the outer meaning of it, whereas the inner meaning or the implied meaning, the mafhum, is that if the opposite meaning would be the implied meaning, if a righteous person, a reliable person was to give you information, then you do not need to verify. Now, will we be able to use this as evidence, as an argument in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or will He make us be held accountable for taking this as an argument? On Judgment Day, will we be free of any responsibility if we were to say that I took this hadith based on khabarul wahid, solitary narration, because it came from a trustworthy, reliable person? This is studied in ilm al-usul. Because if a person was not to take, for example, if a person was not to take solitary narration into value as it being a way of establishing a shari'i ruling, then it would become extremely difficult to establish many shari'i rulings, because most of our traditions are not based on mutawatir chains or mutawatir hadiths. They are solitary hadiths. But we need to analyze and scrutinize each and every one of them based on the different classifications and the different categories that they might have, looking at the chain, the sanad, looking at the text itself, and making a reference as to whether it was issued by the ma'soom or not. Which is why here in the text we can see that the lawgiver, the question that we ask is, will the lawgiver hold us accountable if we were to take this as a proof for us? Now, when it comes to solitary narrations, there are different categories. For example, we have hadith sahih, hadith hasan, hadith muwathaq, da'if, and all of these things are discussed in ilm al-usul. Ilm al-usul studies the credibility of each of these kinds and whether or not they can be used for us or against us by the lawgiver when it comes to extracting from them a religious ruling. Ilm al-usul looks into khabarul wahid as to whether it is a hujjah, it is valid, and in all its categories or not. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.